Let's talk about heat in the Nomad for a second. The Nomad has overheated and fallen out of the sky on me more than I'd like, and I couldn't understand why. Finally one day I saw that it was overheating before the shutdown occurred. After initially looking into it, I just assumed the ship needed better coolers, but I'm not sure about that now.
System failure imminent.
I have no idea.
It says system failure imminent. System overheating.
Interesting.
I wonder what's overheating.
I mean, it couldn't be this kinetic energy that's generating in the back of our cargo.
Oh, good point. More on that later. The Nomad has 4 components that produce excessive heat. All 3 shields and the power plant. That's 2 more excessive heat causing components than normal for a ship with only 2 size 1 coolers. These issues cause the ship to overheat with its stock loadout if you do absolutely anything for too long, like have your quantum drive active for navigational purposes. I'm pointing the finger at myself on that one. Oh god.
Oh, don't say oh god. I see ground.
Though piloting the ship without issue can be done with some compromise, like shutting off one of the shields until you need it, if you can afford to splurge a little on an upgrade, you can all but avoid these issues altogether. The question is, what do you upgrade? Well, in this case, the correct answer may be a downgrade. First, let's look at whether it's more cost effective to swap out the single power plant for something more heat efficient, get 2 better cooling coolers, or more heat efficient shields. That's assuming we can all agree that the 3 shields on the Nomad are one of the ship's saving graces and should not be compromised, heat or nah. Speaking of which, all shields produce excessive heat, so there are no heat sensitive options in that arena. With that in mind though, we'll touch on shields as well. Let's talk about shields. The Nomad already comes stock with the best size 1 shields in any class other than military when it comes to heat dissipation. The WEB shields come with a class leading max cooling rate of 89. That's 40 points more than its nearest competitor, the INK shield, at 49. Even if you decide to go with the better military grade shields, the power draw would be more than a stock power plant could handle, at which point you'd need to upgrade the shields and the power plant. Not the best economical solution. Because of this, I don't think upgrading the shields for better thermal performance would be a solid choice. Plus, I'm not sure it would be worth it even if you had the dough to spend on it. If you guys want to see those tests, let me know in the comments. I don't mind throwing those together. But the WEBs are awesome little shields though. Why would you ever swap? So next up, we're going to take a look at coolers. The Nomad comes with the same coolers that the Hull A and the Reliant Core comes with, among other ships, which are 2 size 1 Arctic Storm coolers. I say that to say that though they are decent, both of those ships have more efficient power plants. But even that doesn't matter, as replacing either of those loadouts with the Nomad's stock power plant, heat dissipation isn't an issue. This is likely due to the lack of a 3rd shield, generating even more heat for the ship that the power plant's excessive heat is now adding to. To touch on my quantum drive use I spoke of earlier, though I know quantum drives generate an extreme amount of heat, I've never had heat from one cause either of the aforementioned ships to shut down, which just reinforces my thoughts on labeling the stock power plant as the culprit for the overheating / power loss issues. Though the size 1 power bolt dissipates heat quickly enough for the 2 shield setups, as I just pointed out, it simply dissipates heat too slowly for the more heat intensive 3 shield system found in the Nomad. Because of this, I won't go into replacing the coolers in this video, where I'll be reporting on my findings on the Nomad's stock power plant. But as always, if you'd like to see that kind of work being done, leave it in the comments. On to the power plant. It seems to me that the power plant was producing excessive heat, so I started researching power plants in DPS Calc. Right away I could see that the stock power plant, the power bolt, was showing a red marker next to it. I assumed that this was an indicator that the power plant was producing excessive heat, kind of like how the shields naturally do. Then I scrolled through other power plant options and noticed that they didn't have the red indicator when selected. This led me to believe that not all power plants would create the amount of excessive heat that the stock power plant does. Hence, the hunt for a more efficient power plant was on and popping. To compare and contrast, I selected 3 size 1 civilian power plants. I only chose civilian class power plants. For consistency, the stock Nomad power plant is a civilian class power plant, and cost, I'd like to keep the upgrade I consider to be cost effective. The first was the Nomad stock size 1 grade C civilian Powerbolt, which produces 2,104 units of power per second, but has the red excessive heat indicator. Next, I chose the Powerplant right above the Powerbolt in terms of power produced, the size 1 grade C Powerplant, the Magnabloom. This power plant produces more power than the stock Powerbolt at 2,209 units of power per second and has no red indicator signaling excessive heat. I also went down to the power plant below the Powerbolt in terms of power produced, but more importantly, cheaper, the size 1 grade C Light Blossom. It produces 1,998 units of power per second, just under the 2,104 units of power per second the stock power plant provides, but does not have the red excessive heat indicator when installed. An initial look at the stats didn't show any differences that would account for 2 of the 3 power plants being more thermally efficient than the stock power plant. And just then I thought, an efficiency rating for the power plants would be awesome. A formula that takes into account all the power plant's thermal data and gives you a rating on the power plant's efficiency. I don't know, just a thought. Expanding the stats. After learning how to properly use DPS Calc, it was a struggle. I was able to expand the available stats for power plants and focus on just the power plants I wanted to compare. Turns out, after hours of research and headaches, there is a stat that separates these 3 power plants, and it's called, drumroll please, you got it, max cooling rate. This stat is the rate the power plant dissipates heat. The lower this stat is, the slower the heat generated by the power plant dissipates. If it's not dissipated quickly enough, it just combines with the heat being generated by your shields, and in my case the quantum drive, and then causes all kinds of issues. Having 3 shields and only 2 coolers is already putting you at a disadvantage heat-wise. The excessive heat from the power plant is just adding insult to injury. Those 3 shields are a blessing and a curse. After realizing this, I took note of the max cooling rates of all the power plants picked and realized that there was a 1-point difference between these 3 power plants. The Magnabloom at 61, the Powerbolt, the stock for the Nomad, at 60, and the Light Blossom at 61, the max cooling rate threshold. I learned the 2 power plants with 61, the Magnabloom and the Light Blossom, dissipate heat just quick enough that it doesn't create an excessive heat issue in the Nomad. The stock power plant in the Nomad, the Powerbolt, has a max cooling rate of 60 and doesn't dissipate heat enough for the Nomad. So, the max cooling rate of the power plant to keep the Nomad from overheating in its stock configuration is 61. Good to know. Expanding the search. After this, I thought a more efficient power plant could outright solve the overheating issue altogether, so I expanded the search again. This time I sorted the list of all power plants by max cooling rate. Then I searched for the power plant that had the highest max cooling rate but also produced just enough power for the Nomad. Nothing more, for efficiency and to keep the cost down. That power plant was the size 1 Civilian Class D Zapjet. The Nomad needs 1,784 units of power a second and the Zapjet produces 1,893, so we're good on power. This also means it produces less excessive power than the stock power plant. The Zapjet produces 211 fewer units of power per second, a 10% drop off in power produced, which will make the system more efficient overall and produce less heat that would then need to be dissipated. It also has a max cooling rate of 73. That's a 10% higher max cooling rate over the stock power plant's 60. With less heat being generated and cooling faster, the Zapjet is just what we need. To confirm my suspicion about the max cooling rate being the determining factor causing the overheating in the Nomad, I decided to look at other possible stats that would affect the overheating differences between these power plants. I created a table that opened the search to all civilian power plants, extended the stats to be examined to include all stats that were different between them, and highlighted them in blue. Then I excluded all the stats that were the same, which left me with this table. This allowed me to isolate only the stats that differentiated them. So right here we have a table showing all the civilian size 1 power plants. The only stats here that don't pertain to the thermodynamics are the grade column and the base price. I included the grade column to give perspective on where they sit in the hierarchy of power plants. I included the base price to give perspective on how they stack up against each other economically. I'll be comparing all the other power plants against the stock power plant for the Nomad, the Powerbolt, since it's the only one on this list that produces the red excessive heat indicator and DPS calculator, and as such I have it highlighted in red. The first thing I notice is how the max cooling rate of the Zapjet is so much higher than the others. After that, I looked at the other stats. In the first column, power draw request time, I couldn't discern whether a lower request time or a higher request time was better, so I compared the Powerbolt against the power plant that was higher and one that was lower in the request time. The Powerbolt has a higher request time than the Zapjet, yet the Zapjet does not have the red excessive heat indicator. Conversely, the Magna Bloom has a higher request time than the Powerbolt and does not have the red indicator either. This indicates that it does not matter if the request time is higher or lower than the Powerbolt, neither of those scenarios produce the red excessive heat indicator. So power draw request time isn't the determining factor. In the next column, power, where more power produces more heat, we'll compare the Powerbolt to the next highest power producing power plant on the list, the Magna Bloom. Since the Magna Bloom produces more power than the Powerbolt but doesn't give the red indicator for excessive heat generation, producing more power can't be the factor we're looking for either. In the third column we have the decay rate of EM. Now the Powerbolt and the Light Blossom both have a decay rate of EM of 0.2. But the Light Blossom doesn't give the red indicator that the Powerbolt does. This means the decay rate of EM can't be the determining factor. In the next column over we have the max cooling rate. We've already covered this in the previous section, so I won't cover it again here. Next to that we have the thermal energy base, where a lower thermal energy base is better for the thermal efficiency. Comparing the Powerbolt to the Ion Burst, we see that the Ion Burst has a much higher thermal energy base than the Powerbolt. Yet the Ion Burst doesn't give the red excessive heat indicator that the Powerbolt does. This indicates that the thermal energy base is not the determining factor as well. In the next column, thermal energy draw, where a lower thermal energy draw is better for thermal efficiency, I'll compare the Powerbolt to the White Rose. The White Rose has a way higher thermal energy draw than the Powerbolt, yet it doesn't give the red excessive heat indicator that the Powerbolt does. This suggests that the thermal energy draw is not the determining factor. In the last column we have thermal mass. A lower thermal mass is better for thermal efficiency. In this case, we'll compare the Powerbolt to the White Rose again. In this scenario, the White Rose has a higher thermal mass than the Powerbolt, yet again, it does not produce the red excessive heat indicator that the Powerbolt does, indicating that this is not the determining factor. In conclusion, the only stat that's different between all of the power plants is max cooling rate. That and the comparison showed that the max cooling rate was indeed the determining factor in the overheating of the Nomad, and that the Zapjet gives us the best max cooling rate of all civilian size 1 power plants. As you can see here, even in a cost comparison, the Zapjet comes out ahead as the best bang for your buck option at 15,000 alpha EUC, which is just a few box missions worth of time. Next I had to test all of this theoretical mumbo jumbo. Testing. So I checked for sellers of the Zapjet and was relieved that the Dumpers Depot in Area 18, my home spot, has it for sale. But I saw that you can save even more EUC by taking the trip over to HURL2, where it sells for 13,968 alpha EUC. For a control in this test, I used the stock power plant, the Powerbolt, turned the engines on, and the thrusters. These were the results. The quantum drive test. This test was performed with the ship, thrusters, and quantum drive all active. The ship would eventually turn off, which left me without the ability to track the EN because it was moving too quickly, but these are the results.
Weapon system power running low.
Next up, we'll test the Zapjet. This first test is done with just the power and thrusters on. These are the results. Next we have the quantum drive test, where the ship, thrusters, and quantum drive are all active at once. These are the results. The heat in our Zapjet test never got above baseline numbers. Only in the power usage did the numbers go up, which is to be expected. As far as quantum travel is concerned, both power plants performed the same while in quantum. That is to say that their baseline heat stats didn't change while in transit. In conclusion, my overall take on this situation is that the Nomad comes stock with the worst power plant in the game when it comes to thermal efficiency. And having a higher than normal number of shields, 3, only compounds this problem. This leaves the ship highly prone to overheating. Better coolers remedy the situation, but that's expensive and will require an upgraded power plant as well that could handle the increased power draw of the better coolers. That's 4 components that you'd have to replace and not very economical. Again, I'm not even sure it would even work, but I am going to test it. You could limit the number of shields you use to 2, which would fix the issue but take away one of the most appealing aspects of the ship. Not an option in my opinion. Then there's the power plant. A simple swap of one 15,000 Alpha UEC component, the size 1 civilian grade D Zap jet, solves the issue altogether. Alright, I hope I didn't just overcomplicate something super simple, but that's just how my brain works. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.